G'day guys, I've just been joined by the lovely Frasier Perry, who is one of the top ranked World Eaters players in the world with a ton of GT wins under his belt, and we talked about World Eaters, Chaos Space Marines, combat tips and tricks, and some general strategies that you can use to improve your game when playing with these combat heavy factions. We touched on a whole ton of different stuff. I really do hope you find this conversation interesting, and with that being said, let's jump straight into it.
Look for the blood god.
G'day guys, before we get stuck into the video, I just wanted to show you these really cool blessings trackers by warhammerstation.com. If you'd like to pick up one, you can do so by commenting below with what you would like to see added to the blessings table. So which ability would you like to see if you could create another one yourself? So for example, you could have a reroll charges if you're able to roll 333+. Or you might have something like +1 to charge army-wide if you roll 2 5s. So give me your idea on what you think would make a really cool additional blessing, and then I'm going to select one person from that comment section, and I'm going to send them out one of these blessings trackers. So if you want to enter the draw to get one of these in your hands, all you got to do is chuck that comment below. With that being said, let's get stuck into the video. Alrighty, first of all, Frasier, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to have a chat with me and my audience. Did you want to maybe start off by just introducing yourself to listeners, people who may not have heard of you before, a little bit about your history, and about your tournament results, those sorts of things?
So I'm Frasier. I'm from Calgary, Alberta, in Canada. I've been playing World Eaters since the beginning of ninth. However, before that, I played a lot of melee armies, and I was fairly successful at events. I won a couple tournaments and came third at a big like Goonhammer event with Harlequin before World Eaters. But a lot of my success came once I got really comfortable with like all my movement of the game, and I got the World Eaters Codex. So basically, since 10th has come out, in 2024, I won one of the first large GTs that World Eaters had won, kind of after that initial Master of Execution patch, and we got brought down a little bit. But throughout the summer, I won probably 5 or 6 events, anything from team events, double events, multiple undefeated GTs. And recently, I went to the World Championships of Warhammer with World Eaters. And I actually even challenged myself to bring a list without Lord Invocatus, which was quite unusual. But basically, at World, it's only other people who have won large GTs, and I still managed to go 5-3 without one of like our basically core rules in the army, which was good. So I feel confident with the army and confident talking about it, and I love talking about World Leaders.
Hell yeah, hell yeah. 5-3 at the World Championships of Warhammer is a very respectable result. You know, like you said, everybody that's there is a GT winner. So every game is the equivalent of that top table game. And trying to go through 8 rounds of that is an absolute grind. I know some of the best players that I know attended and went 4-4. You know, so to go 5-3 just shows the caliber of player. And I think it speaks to your years of experience in combat because, well, personally, one of the things I find so immensely challenging but also rewarding about the World Eaters is that it's all combat. You have to figure out how to do everything, and you can only really use combat tricks. Whereas there's a lot of armies where you're like, okay, I've got a situation, but I've got guns, so I can dig myself out. You know, or it might be a shooting army that's got some combat, so they can dig themselves out of tricky spots with the, you know, multiple different tools at their disposal. We don't have that luxury. So once you've mastered that fight phase, it's so much more rewarding when you're actually able to go out and achieve those results because you're like, yeah, I just won a tournament and I didn't shoot once. You know, like it's so much more
exactly.
more rewarding. So sounds like you're definitely one of the people that we want to talk to, and we want to get some of your insights about the World Eaters and hopefully share some of your skills with those watching. So did you want to maybe just tell us a little bit about where you think world leaders are sitting right now competitively. Do you think they're one of the strongest factions? Do you think they're really struggling at the moment? Do you think it's something that is prohibitively difficult for less experienced players? That's sort of in my experience is that when you know what you're doing, world leaders are fantastic. But when you're sort of trying to find your feet, it's a very hard army to pilot. What are your sort of thoughts in that regard?
So kind of exactly as you said, I feel very confident with my world leaders in that like basically anything. We do have a couple bad matchups, but as far as where we are in the meta right now, is like general, like exact same player skill, we're probably somewhere in the middle of the pack. The thing about world leaders is there's such a high skill cap on them because of like the movement. They're so good at like late game scoring and just knowledge of all like the different movement tricks that you have at your disposal really helps. We have great units. But the only thing is unlike other armies, as you said, if you're mainly a shooting army and you make a mistake, you might still be back in cover on your side of the board. If you're world leaders and you make a mistake, you're sat either in the middle of the board or in your opponent's like deployment zone with like nothing around you, and you lose that unit. And then, especially with in an army where units cost as much as they do for us, that is like really really bad. So it's one of the armies where if you're doing everything right, it feels really good. But as soon as you start making a mistake, it is like incredibly hard to come back from. Especially in the competitive games, you have to be kind of really on top of yourself. And I'm sure we can kind of talk more about that later. But the nice thing is with our movement, I feel like we can kind of play into most armies. We don't have a lot of like cheap trash, so stuff like guard with lots of like cheap screens can be quite a problem for us. But just having like the movement and even like the randomization of like our like blood god rolls or like Angron coming back kind of gives us the tools we need to like. There's no games that are completely lost before they start. So
Yeah.
I feel good about our army.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, it's got some good matchups, it's got some bad matchups. What is your method for sort of figuring out whether or not something is a good matchup or a bad matchup? Like, so speaking to the strengths and the weaknesses of the faction, when you're looking across the table and you see your opponent's army, what are you looking for to identify whether or not it's a good matchup or a bad one? And then how do you go about formulating a game plan based on that?
So a lot of it for me based upon there's a few layers. So first of all is the accessibility to screens. Just because like Angron is basically our only unit that like flies that people bring. And if people just have a ton of trash and their whole army is like sitting behind a ton of trash, that is really, really, really hard for us to get through and deal with. And they can kind of keep you in the mid board, which is like good for scoring in the first couple turns. But if they have more units than you, and just a ton of garbage, like a ton of like small guard units and stuff like that, with like a lot of tanks behind, like a lot of the time you're just going to get picked up. So you kind of need to wait. You almost need them to make a mistake, and just that's when you need to get really kind of tricky about like maybe using like your Invocatus move to bring Jackals forward to deal with the stuff in the middle, and just you have to be really careful with your trades when it comes to armies with a lot of trash. Armies that move faster than we do, so there's no real army with a move characteristic faster than us. However, stuff like Hypercrypt and Grey Knights, I wouldn't say they're bad matchups, but they're just stuff that you need to watch because they're kind of going up and down around you all the time, and world leaders want to run the board 100% of the time. So when you have that additional layer of randomization, it completely changes how we play into those matchups. Another thing will be like melee, the presence of fights first, and especially like -1 damage. Just like how reliable are we at killing stuff into those matchups? Like Death Guard are tough because Death Guard have a lot of like minuses to hit, minuses to wound, -1 damage, and like a lot of the stuff that our army wouldn't normally bounce on. But we bounce, and not killing units is a big deal, especially if in return they pick up half our unit. And it can go pretty south there. So there's a few ways to mitigate that as much as possible, which I'm sure we'll get into later when we talk about kind of like how to play the army properly. But overall, like we're not in a bad spot in matchups. There are certainly for an army with as limited data sheets as we have, there are drastically different ways to play the game into different armies.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think so I break it down into strategy and tactics, right? And I differentiate those. So for example, a tactic might be charging your rhino into that unit that has fights first and then charging your 8 bound in from one side so that they're forced to fight the rhino. That's a tactic, right? That's a specific sequence of moves. But then there's the strategy, which is the overall plan on how you approach the game. You know, am I planning to play really cagey, hide everything, stay out of line of sight, come out on turn 3 and just overwhelm? Or am I planning to use Lord Invocatus to send in early, box my opponent in their deployment zone, and keep the fight happening? Like that's your sort of overall strategy. So I think when you learn the tactics, that's really fantastic. And like you can watch all of the masterclass videos and learn all the different nuances of the movement and all that sort of stuff. And that's fantastic. And people absolutely should do that if they want to get better with world eaters. But you also need to learn the strategy component of it. And that's arguably the hardest part to sort of teach because you can't, it's case by case. Every situation is going to be different and depends on what your opponent's army has. Like, for example, if there's, an army that has lots of deep striking threats, that can be a real problem for us because we don't have the disposable units to screen them out. So all of a sudden, your whole strategy has to change. So that's sort of where I sort of sit when it comes to assessing a matchup. It's basically you've got to focus on that strategy element, and a lot of the people I see them fall down when they go. I've got Invocatus, I've got Exalted 8 bound, they can scout, so therefore I always just scout forward and send in, and it's like that's not always the best strategy. Sometimes it is, and it's particularly into inexperienced opponents. That can be a fantastic strategy because they don't screen you out properly. You send in, you blow up something really important, and you just win from there. But the more experienced your opponents get, the less valuable that strategy becomes, and the more you want to use your scout moves to stage and you want to sort of manage the tempo. Do you have any advice for people, sort of broad advice on how to use the faction in terms of strategy? And then we'll break down some more detail later.
So it's very list dependent.
Yeah.
But in general, there's a few layers to kind of come in every game. And the most important phase by far in Warhammer and the phase that wins and loses games is the movement phase. And we are good at it because of our obviously high movement characteristics. But because we have the blessing of being able to move further than other people, that means that you kind of get to pre-measure everything. And the problem that I find is a lot of world leader players get kind of greedy. So when it comes to strategy, like there's not a lot of, apart from our like randomness of our army rule. To be honest, there shouldn't be a lot of randomness in like how you're playing. Like you shouldn't be going for like long bomb charges unless you need to. Every angle should be pre-measured, just kind of like looking at like the max move of your opponents, like tanks and stuff like that. Anything that could threaten you, and measuring out the angle of exactly what they can see and being able to stage in terrain correctly. And kind of with our movement, you can understand exactly what's going to happen in your opponent's turn, kind of mathematically based upon like just numbers, like what should happen, and the movement of how far your opponents can get. And like often you can be more aggressive than you think you can be. Once you kind of measure everything out and you can see, okay, like I'm actually completely safe here and like the staging point in the middle of the board, whereas I would have previously, instead of like before I pre-measured it, just been in my deployment zone because then I know 100% I'm not getting shot. So it's just knowing those absolutes kind of supports the strategies of using Invocata to move people forward. I've always had Exalted 8 bound up in Deep Strike just because I think that not only is it a nice tool to kind of have for people to screen out, but for the no fallback aura, it means that I can kind of support my army with that whenever I need to and whatever go turn I have using Ingress. So to just kind of give that extra layer of like oomph to my push, because as soon as a unit's unable to fall back, that is like a huge problem because then like you can start protecting like parts of your army in that combat. Just knowing where to put your cheap units is huge. Like just because they're cheap doesn't mean they're not important. Arguably, they're some of our most important units because as soon as you run out of that, then our important units are doing the scoring. So just being conscientious of where jackals are. If you move them from where they are, how close are they to like the middle objective? So in Worlds, I only bought one spot of jackals. So and I didn't have Invicata, so often I was bringing them up from the home objective close to the middle, so I could potentially put them onto the middle to deal with whatever like screens my opponents had, and start the trading game on those objectives. But 100% of the time, as world leaders, because of our stratagem to be able to bleed on objectives, it doesn't really matter what you're playing on, but our cheap units are trying to start that trading game in the mid board. And that's where you want to play your game, is because behind all of like the staging terrain, even like on the edge of your deployment zone, you can reach all three of the middle objectives usually. So you want to start that by going onto objective. If you can stay hidden, but bleeding on it, forcing your opponent to come up. And that's just like generally how to play the army on like a super basic level. Again, there's more stuff we can talk about later. But as far as tactics go, for me, it's just your management of your cheap units, understanding kind of like counting your cards, what secondaries you had, what secondaries you could have coming up, and then thinking about your opponents as well. Like have they had behind enemy lines? Have they had storm hostile? Have they had, and just positioning your stuff and kind of taking the time to think things through, because we've missed an entire phase. Like you don't have a shooting phase. So I guarantee you that you can't be slow, but you have the time to think through things, and you don't need to rush things. Because again, as soon as you start making mistakes, that's when everything gets haywire with world leaders. So yeah, the general strategies are kind of built into the data sheets of what everything should be doing. But like 100% of the time, I'm not sending out units individually unless I need to, and I'm always making sure that either nothing's dying in a turn, or usually like 3 or 4 units, unless I just need to deny some scoring.
Yeah, absolutely. So that last piece is so critical, is to not send out units one at a time. A lot of the times I'll see people that they'll successfully hide everything. They'll be like, "Cool, everything is hidden," and it's like big tick there. You've done a good job. You've hidden, and then like your opponent will put something medium sized on the central objective, and they'll go, "Cool, nothing else. I can't charge anything else, and there's only one unit in the center. So I'm just going to send out my 6-man Exalted 8-bound, kill that thing off the center." And it's like, no, that's a huge mistake, because now in your opponent's turn, they're going to kill that 6-man Exalted 8-bound, and everything else is going to remain outside of your charge range. And now you haven't really achieved much, right? So knowing how to go, cool, I'm going to put myself in a position now with my movement so that next turn I can send everything at once. That's a real critical element to it, because if you send out, like, we got tough units, right? Like the Exalted 8-bound, 6-man Exalted 8-bound is tough as hell. Angron's tough as hell. I'm a huge advocate for Terminators, obviously. They're tough as hell, right? Like,
Yeah.
we've got some really, really tough, hard to kill units. But if you only present one unit, like, anybody can kill one unit. If they put their whole army into it, they'll kill it, right? So if you think about it, like, if it's going to take their entire army to kill that unit of 6 Exalted 8-bound off the central objective, you might as well simultaneously throw out Angron, throw out your regular 8-bound, throw out your Berserkers, because now when they go to turn their whole army, if it's going to take the whole army to kill that one unit, well, then they can't kill any of the other stuff that you just sent out. So you're getting to send it out for free. Obviously tempoing that, a little bit. One of the other things, which it sounds like it's in direct contrast with that point, but sending out the minimum required to achieve your goal is something that I'm a huge advocate for as well. And by that, I mean, if they've put that unit on the central objective, maybe don't send your Exalted 8-bound to kill it. Maybe just send a unit of 5 Berserkers to go sit on the objective and out-OC them. It's like, you don't have to kill them. You've gone out, you've denied them that objective, and now they're in a position where they're going to have to send more in to kill those Berserkers. So you've saved your big Exalted 8-bound brick by playing that objective control game. And that way it allows you to save your resources, because one of the things I'm sure you've noticed is that we don't have a lot of units. Like, if you've got Exalted 8-bound and Angron, that's already nearly 1,000 points. Like, it's so crazy, 2 units. So we can't afford to lose units. It's one of those things where you have to play super defensive until at such a time as you flip it and you go, now I'm going hyper aggro. That's the strategy that I sort of employ, is just play cagey, send out small things, clear screens, and then at one point just go, cool, now is the time that I'm going to rapid ingress, I'm going to advance and charge, Angron's coming out, and I'm going to charge lots of things, is generally the better way to play it. So I guess what was the next question I had on here? So advice for people who are looking to improve with World Eaters. So obviously you've been playing combat armies for a very long time, and combat armies, they require a lot of experience to sort of master, but experience is one of those things that you can only really get it over time. Do you have any advice or tips on how people can sort of condense that experience?
So if I could sit down with anybody for 5 minutes and I could talk to them about how to play the army better immediately, there's a few things that I would go through. So first of all, it's a scoring game. So you don't win by killing more units. You win by scoring more points. So being able to pace yourself and understanding your secondaries and knowing what you need to do versus what you want to do will make a big difference in a lot of your. And that comes again to like the greediness that I see a lot of people get, and they play World Eaters kind of like unsuccessfully. Is they want to kill stuff, they want to overreach, they want to go for like the mid-range 6-7 inch charges. And it's like, truth be told, like they don't need to be killing those units. You can sometimes let your opponent score around a primary if you need to, just to stop yourself from giving up like key assets on that side while you like wait for either an ingress turn to be able to deal with something that you can't reach from your deployment zone, or you just need to stage something a little better for a turn. So just understanding like the state of where you're at in the game for your scoring is absolutely huge. Buff distribution. So Angron gives out either +1 to charge, which you shouldn't normally need if you're playing World Eaters how you should be. What you're really looking for is the reroll hit, just to kind of make your army that much better. 8-bound have the reroll wounds, and then the no fallback. So just knowing like where you need these things on the board and where things should be present is important. And another part that comes to that is math. So unfortunately, a lot of the stuff we said we were never going to use again in our life after high school, we're using in our hobby. And this probably understand that a lot of new players don't really understand is once you're playing at a really high level, I don't want to say it's not fun, but there's almost, aside from like completely egregious dice rolls, there's no randomness to it. The whole game is just a large equation of how far can I move, where can they see me, how long is their charge if they want to get to me, and then being able to do the math in your head of, okay, I want to send this out to kill this thing. How likely is that? And just making those consistent choices, and that goes with like the pre-measuring that we discussed earlier as well. Literally measuring out somebody's max movement. Like here's the unit. Okay, here's a piece of terrain, and I want to go in the terrain. So I'm going to measure out the max movement of this unit, and then from here I'm going to see the angle that I can put my units behind to be able to keep them safe. And if they can't fit within that, then I'm going to find something different to do because I'm not like losing a unit for no reason. We can't afford that. At the top level, literally the entire game just turns into math. It's where do I have to move? Can you kill me? What do I have to do to kill you? If I'm hitting on 3s, okay, I'm multiplying something by like 0.66, like in my head, and I'm trying to figure out like just everything that's going to happen probably on the table, and just understanding all of those kind of exchanges and being able to know the probability of that kind of helps shape a lot of your decision making in the game. And a lot of that comes with pre-measuring. So basically, like if my opponent's somewhere up here and I have a piece of terrain like here, I'm going to measure how far they can move and then the angle of that on the terrain, and I'm going to see exactly where I can put myself safely. So there's no randomness in the way that you play. You're not going for long bomb charges. You know that the stuff that you are going into that you need to kill, you're going to kill 70% of the time based upon like just regular dice math, and then being able to distribute the rerolls of the buffs that you need, or choosing your stratagems based upon which units are the least likely to be able to do what you need them to do in a turn. Especially when you have to play an army as carefully as we do, unfortunately, it turns into kind of like a very kind of like mathematical equation. Um, but if you just like enjoying the game on like the base level, like World Leaders have like so many great tools. Um, Another thing that's really important aside from math is just knowing how like your movement. And the biggest thing that I could tell anybody about World Leaders is knowing your pylon and your charges and the rules around that. And you can often like you can do something called I think they call it slingshotting. So basically, the rules on charging is if you can make base to base with models, you have to when you're charging something. But the rest of the models that can't make base to base just have to end closer to the enemy unit. So basically, let's say I have a tank here, a tank here, and this is like we'll call it like a 13, 14-inch impossible charge to this further tank. I
Yep.
have a unit of Exalted 8 here. So what I'm going to do is I can charge in with another unit down here into this tank that I know can kill that tank. So I'm going to charge the unit in, and I'm going to kind of outline the bottom of that tank to kind of stop a lot of these Exalted from getting into base-to-base contact. And when I roll the charge, let's say it's a 5 or a 6 inch charge, um, and you make it, then all, all the units that can go like right here, right? Or like 7 or 8 inch charge, whatever you make.
Yep.
All the ones that can make it are going to go here, and you're going to put in as minimum units as possible that you need to be able to fit in the if they can base they can requirement. And the rest of your squad is literally just going to run forward straight up towards this tank over here. And once you kill this tank with this unit over here, as soon as because even though this unit is no longer in combat because the tank died, because they charged, they're still eligible to make a pile-in move in that turn. So then you can pile into this tank and you can hit something that would have been like an impossible charge before. And also using that in your consolidation moves. So after combat, you can move 3 inches. So you want to put yourself in spots using your pile-ins and stuff where you can consolidate into more units, especially if you have exalted, to manage like the fallback. Even if you don't have exalted, lots of units like can't shoot after they fall back. And can't really and have to focus on those. So even if you have like terminators and stuff like that, like I know you like, just be able to position yourself properly on the consolidate or the pile-ins to be able to cover your opponent's army as much as you can while everything else is coming up is a huge, huge tool.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Huge tool.
some
And just
people do have the capacity to fall back and shoot, but even then, often it relies stratagem usage. So making sure that you're taxing your opponent's stratagems as best you can by going, cool, I'm going to pile into you with my regular 8 bound or my Terminators or my Berserkers or whatever. I know in your turn you can fall back and you can spend a CP to still shoot, but now you have to spend a CP, you know? So you're kind of taxing
and
your
only one unit
opponent's...
can.
Yeah, and only one unit's going to be able to do it, absolutely. So yeah, there's
Yeah.
tons of really cool stuff you can do with that. One of the things I always say is that in your turn, you want to end your movement in the position where you want to be at the start of your next turn. You know, don't worry so much about, you know, your opponent's
Yeah.
turn. Go, well, where I've got my 8 bound here, where do I want them to be at the start of my next turn? Well, if I'm heading towards that objective over there, and my plan is to take that with 8 bound, well, I want to move them towards that so that they are 9 inches away from that objective. So that next turn, if I get cleanse or something, I can move straight on and cleanse. You know, that's another sort of really simple trick that you know people can pick up on. One of the general pieces of advice that I'd give people is to just get in as many games as you can. But there's a big difference between practice and training. And I think this is something that a lot of people sort of don't appreciate, is that if you're playing and you're struggling to get those wins and you're struggling to get those results, and all you do is just play more, you'll get better, but not very rapidly. And some things you might actually get stuck on because there might be something that you're doing wrong. And if you keep doing it, you're just going to get more practiced at doing something wrong. So the way I differentiate between practice and training is those games where you walk away from the game, you talk to your opponent, and you analyze, well, why did I lose? How did I lose? What could I have done differently? You know, training is those things where you're at home and you're just like, cool, I'm going to run the numbers and I'm going to find out, 10 Corn Berserkers with Khan, can it kill Magnus? Can it kill Land Raider? Can it kill, 6 Exalted 8 Band if I get the mirror match? Like, doing all of the necessary pre-work to make sure that when you do get into those matchups, like you were saying, it's a numbers game. But if you already have the calculations already sorted, you can just go, cool, I know exactly what to do. If my opponent puts out 5 scouts, I can send in 10 jackals. That's fine. If they put out 5 intercessors, well, now I need to send in berserkers or 8 bound. Knowing what works and what doesn't work and figuring that all out and then intentionally recording and memorizing it, that's the training side of things, not just the mere practice. So I think being very deliberate in making sure you're studying your wins and going, well, what was it that won me that game? Like, really, what was it? It wasn't, and never blaming things like a failed charge. You've never lost a game because you failed the charge, right? You lost the game because you put yourself in a position where there was a decent chance you were going to fail the charge. That was the mistake, and that's what I mean when I tell people that they need to focus more on the training side of things than the mere practice.
Yeah, and another thing that goes with playing more games is just understanding like your opponent's armies, and the more armies and factions you play against, you understand what your opponent needs to do to try and score, like what makes the army tick. A way to mitigate that quite easily is to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So at the World Championships, games were 4 hours. So just saying, hey, what does this army do? It like what does this unit like do again? What is this profile? How far can it move? And then using that to be able to kind of like run the math in your head in games, just having like an open conversation with your opponent. Not only helps build like relationships with your opponent, which is cool. Like we want to play like a social game, but it also like gives you a better handle on everything that's going on in the game. And then, as you said, just like getting more games in, kind of just like bolsters that.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, getting a ton of games in against like your mate who you see all the time, and he plays Tau and you play World Eaters, and you've played 1,000 games. That's nowhere near as valuable as playing 100 games, but into 50 different opponents on all different factions. So that's where practice for practice sake isn't necessarily the right approach. You want to get in that variety of games, and yeah, as to the questions component, I think that's arguably the most important skill that a player can learn, is what questions to ask and how to ask them. Once you've got those two things figured out, you kind of don't need to know your opponent's army, because you just rock. Like, the amount of times that I'll play somebody and it's like the first time I've ever played this faction, so I rock up and I ask some key important questions. Once I've got those questions figured out, from there on out, it's easy mode. Asking, do they have any scouts, infiltrates, or redeploys? I ask every single opponent that at the start, especially nowadays with every detachment coming out and every army having 6 or 7 detachments eventually. Like, even if you feel like you know a faction, you probably don't know the way that they're going to play it. So asking those broad questions, asking things like, well, what's your threat range? If I deploy my 8 bound in here behind this ruin, can that castigator shoot them? And they'll be like, oh, he's got this movement. And you'll be like, can he advance and charge? Yes, he can advance and charge. Do you have any ways of modifying the advance? Oh, you can miracle dice it. Cool. So that means your realistic range is this. So I'm going to make sure that I stay outside of that. And that's without ever reading the Sisters Codex and without ever having played Sisters before. Use those important questions is one of the ways that you can sort of, increase your capacity to engage in those novel challenges. But yeah, so what other questions have I got here? Or unless there's anything else you want to jump in and talk about?
I think you wanted to talk about. I think the wish list was one of the
Oh,
things
absolutely, the wish list.
you
We'll
wanted to
definitely talk about that. Maybe before we jump off because the wish list is kind of just a fluff piece. It's kind of fun to talk about. But in terms of, well, I've got a top player here, it's probably worth asking some more in-game related questions. What would you say?
That's fair.
What would you say? Some of the World Eaters' hardest matchups? And what is your approach to those? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this that, there's easy matchups and they don't really struggle with those. So that's not really the area where they're going to need advice. But it's those hard matchups where you're like, you know what, this faction or this archetype is something that is really difficult for World Eaters players to solve. And how have you gone about solving it?
Yeah, so I'll start this off by saying that one of the biggest reasons why I got burned by some armies at like the World Championships was because of our army rule.
Mm,
So unfortunately, a lot of our stuff based on randomness, and it wasn't even like not getting Angron back that was a problem, because a lot of the stuff you're doing in game should be based on like hopefully getting Angron back.
yeah.
It was like stuff like playing into Grey Knights. Like I played, I think his name's Marco. He's the captain of Team Italy, playing Grey Knights. And I didn't roll advance and charge for 3 turns, and
Yeah.
that like super limited my movement. It just like crippled my army. So it's just like it's very like turn dependent, regardless of like who you're playing, based upon like the buffs that you can get. Because any good player, as soon as, especially if you're going first, or even like if they're going first, as soon as you roll advance, like if you don't roll advance and charge at the top of the battle round, they come way closer to you, and like it limits like so much stuff you can do in the game. But in general, matchups that aren't great are um, again guard, just because of, like the super amount of like junk that they have.
Yeah.
And a good solution for guard is what I don't actually, I'm starting to see it in a few more lists, is literally just like the 5-man berserker squad without a
Yes.
character being attached to it. And like I know that like the temptation is to put characters like on the squad to make them more killy. But having that squad with that volume just gives you the ability to like put them near Invocatus. And like a lot of the time I don't even use Invocatus for 8-bound. The threat of Invocatus, the 8-bound is there. So like all the good players like to deploy carefully. But lots of times Invocatus is used to pull those berserkers forward or pull those jackals forward to be able to deal with the stuff in the mid board. So just having like a squad of berserkers and enough junk to be able to deal with like the amount of trash that guard has is just like crazy. Like you can have sometimes like 60 models. And man, like if you ever tried chewing through like a line, like 2 lines of like 30 models before you can get into anything important in their army that's picking you up, it is like actually like it
It's
can be a
painful.
nightmare.
Yeah.
So just being able to again, as you said, getting the most out of like all of your units and committing as little as possible as you can to get the job done. The 5-man berserkers are a great tool. I'm going to start putting 1 squad in every list while guard is good, just to be able to go up and start like helping to deal with stuff.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been
Angron can
looking at
fly
doing
over.
in the guard matchup
Yeah,
is if you have, let's say you've got 5 berserkers and a master of executions attached, and then you've got 5 berserkers and you've got Khan the Betrayer attached, right? And that's how you normally play the game. If you go into guard, you can absolutely separate off Khan. Don't attach him in that matchup. And now you can go 5 berserkers go into that unit of guardsmen, Khan goes into that unit of guardsmen, and wipe both. And whereas if he was attached, you probably wouldn't be able to stretch the distance, and you'd only be able to wipe one. So being prepared to separate off your characters, in certain matchups. Obviously, you can't do it mid-game, but you can,
yeah,
at the start of the game, you can look at it and be like, he has 7 or 8 trading pieces. I only have 5, right? So that means if he goes, I put out 1, and then I put out 1 to kill it, and then he puts out 1, and then I put out 1 to kill it, I'm going to run out before him. And then he's going to take that last piece that he has, he's going to string it around his Dawn, and I'm not going to be able to charge the Dawn, and it's going to be this huge problem. So when you look at their list and you see what they have, sometimes you want to make that decision to just go, cool, I'm actually going to separate Khan off. I'm not going to attach him in this game. He's going to sit in the Rhino with them, and then sometimes they'll put something out and you'll just send Khan on his own. And he'll rip it apart, and he's also really good because he's got fight on death, so if you do send him out on his own, he'll kill something, and then if they try to countercharge to knock you off the objective, he fights on death and wipes them out as well. So you get a lot of value out of Khan as just a single 100-point missile that you can send out. And then you've got those 5-man units of berserkers, very similar. That's sort of my sort of thoughts on the guard matchup. Although it is a very hard matchup, especially
Yeah,
previously when they have the Bullgrin, which are neg 1 damage. That's just really hard for us to chew through. Um, yeah,
yeah. Like I was playing one of the other Canadian guys that played guard at like the World Championship, and the game was actually going really poorly until he made a mistake of on his home objective. There was like the I forget which train layout was, but there was like a wall like reasonably close to the home objective. He managed to kill Angron in Overwatch, which is like crippling.
yeah,
So Angron killed two tanks, and then he was about to go into like the other two, and they picked him up in Overwatch. But he left his tank, one of his tanks, too close to the wall. So I used Exalted 8 bound to kill like one of the units on his home objective, and then consolidate into the tanks. Um, and I actually pinned it against the wall, so it couldn't shoot me. It couldn't drive around, and it failed to fall back, so it couldn't. So it's just like in the game, being able to do those things
yeah,
and get the most out of your unit. And sometimes that means giving your units the mobility they need on the charge to be able to pile in by deliberately leaving them further back, like the end of the unit further back. So even with like a long charge, there's no way they can get around into engagement, and that gives you more movement on the unit. So you're not reducing your charge range because a lot of your units are still up here, at like within like let's call like a 4 inch charge. But these guys back here, you've left them like 4 inches behind. They can still like with a decent charge like be able to get into engagement range if you need the whole unit here. But they now need like an 8 inch charge or like a 9 inch charge, and you've already blocked out this part. So now it's like impossible unless you roll a 12 to get over to here. So then you can get more utility out of the units, maybe pile into a second thing, and just like
absolutely.
and the movement phase, just being
Yeah,
like knowledgeable about the positioning of every model and like where it's going with everything is like, especially in the guard matchup when there's so much trash, is it's so important.
yeah. That's actually a really, really
Yeah,
powerful tactic where I see a lot of people. They move their units as blobs. They're just like, cool. Here's a blob of 8 band, and that blob moves up. And it's like, well, sometimes it's actually better for you to go, cool. I'm going to take the closest model to your tank, and I'm going to move him his maximum distance, so he's right next to your tank. But the rest of the guys, they don't necessarily have to do that. It might be better for them to move around this way so that when you charge, you can charge that tank, and then these guys back here can't get in base contact with it, so therefore they're free to move this way, and now they're right next to this other tank, and then when you pile in, you can pile into this other tank. There's lots of really cool stuff you can do with movement, and I think the guard matchup is definitely one of those where knowing those tricks, allowing you to engage multiple things, can like double or even triple the value of each one of your units. If you send 6 Exalted 8 bound, they go out, they kill one Lehman Russ, and then they die, that's not good value. But if you send them out and you tag
yeah,
2 or 3 tanks, and then all of a sudden they go to fall back, they fail their fallback check, now they can't shoot those fucking 8 bound, you've just 3 to 4 times as much value out of that 8 band unit. And it all came down to using
yeah.
those tactics in the movement phase to engage. What would you say? Are there any other particularly hard matchups for the World Eaters?
There are some weird matchups for sure. Like Grey Knights, you're kind of dancing everywhere on the board, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad matchup because once you start like touching them, like you have the speed to be able to chase them, and you're never going to keep a 3 inch out of seeing everything. But just being able to mitigate the 9 inches, so every turn that it's only really one unit that's going to be able to do what it wants, is important. And then understanding how, again, reading the data sheets and not overestimating the killing power of your stuff. Like you're going to bounce hard off of a 10 man like Grey Knight's Terminator. Even like killing like World Eaters Terminators is like a nightmare. But like anything with like AOC and stuff like that, like just
AOC is so
understanding like
painful.
oh my god, like just understanding like the math on everything is really important for that matchup and being able to kind of like stage yourself correctly so you're like a decent charge for 2 units. When they missed, you can still get a charge off.
Yep.
It's important. Apart from that, like Grey Knights are like fairly straightforward. I'm not super concerned about that matchup. Orcs with like a crap ton of trash. Again, just people with more units than us, and that's where like again movement. It's all like your movement stuff and being able to tag multiple units for value is where you're going to get all that stuff back. Like world leaders play great data sheet hammer. Like we have good data sheets. our 8-bound have like auras for some reason, which is like insane when you think about it.
Yeah.
But if you want to win GTs and if you want to like you need to have the movement phase absolutely down pat. It's not going to be on building the perfect list. It's going to be on understanding everything that you can do in a game to get more value out of your units. Sisters, I don't like. I don't like the indirect killing 8-bound in cover.
Yeah.
Is not really fun. But that's kind of a matchup where you almost need to. If you go first, you can get stuff into them. You kind of need to get as much as you can into them as possible. But like castigators and like they can pick up most of your army in a turn. So you need to be confident that you can do quite a bit of damage on the way in. So normally I'll stage in like good spots against sisters, and then I'll have to eat a turn of exorcist shooting. And exorcist shooting isn't the end of the world, but it is the end of the world if they get to do it for like 3 or 4 turns.
Yeah.
So just like knowing that and being able to capitalize, like, okay, I'm not in the best position right now, but I don't want them to be able to do this for another turn, so I have to jump. Like knowing that and be able to make that again, like as you said, like tactics and strategy, like being able to make that decision of this isn't ideal and this isn't reliable and maybe it's not consistent on the map, but it's something I need to do to win this game. It's important. Hallowed Martyrs with sisters get to pick where you fight. So just charging in garbage units and tagging as many units as you can that they have to stop those units from heroically intervening into you and then forcing you to fight them. So like you're not killing the stuff you want to kill. Being able to manage that is also super important. That's actually a really fun matchup for me because I used to play like chess fairly competitively, and that's the only matchup where it feels like there's so many more layers to it that it feels like everything's like a kind of like a chess game. Being able to deal with what do I have to put where in what order to stop them from intervening into me, because if they intervene into you and force you to fight trash like one of your important units, and then they can pick up your important unit, you just lost the game.
Yeah.
So just knowing everything your opponent can do, and again asking all those questions, asking can you get a bonus to charge, what's the movement, what are the abilities on this like data sheet, and having like an open conversation thing with your opponent. Like everybody does it, and opponents that don't like there's nobody like that at like the higher levels of Warhammer, and everybody's going to be like fairly open with their stuff. So just knowing like the full situation you're in and not getting greedy with it again is really important with the sisters matchup.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to that questions piece, I think the advice I'd give people is to just be humble. You know, I think a lot of people they sort of they don't want to ask the questions because then they're kind of revealing themselves as a noob. They're revealing to their opponent that they don't know much. You know, this, that, whatever. But it's like I've played top players from all around the world, and they always ask questions. You know, and I'm playing World Eaters that haven't had any changes in nearly 2 years now. Like since the edition started, we've had the same index, the same rules. You know, nothing's changed. But people will still they'll ask me, can Terminator's Blood Surge move? And I'm like, no, they never have been able to, and they never will be able to. But top players still ask those questions because they recognize that sometimes you don't know the answer to something, and sometimes you'll forget things. So just asking those questions consistently and regularly is a really important piece to that puzzle.
Yeah, like I even played like Jack Harpster at WCW. I had a game against Jack Harpster, and he played World Leaders for like a long time competitively, and like he was asking questions.
Yeah.
But like at that point, like it's literally just like a conversation over a game, like you're having, like almost like with a friend. Like you want to make a friend. Like it's a hobby. Yeah. At the end of the day, like taking it competitively is like fun. Like seriously fun, and like I have fun winning. I don't like losing. Nobody likes losing, but just having fun with it and like engaging in that conversation is probably one of the biggest parts.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that I think that's plenty of digestible advice for the World Eaters players out there looking to improve their game. Now let's have a little bit of fun. So the first thing that I want to say is that, and I want to hear what your thoughts are on this and whether or not you agree. I'm going to make the claim that the World Eaters army rules are the most lore accurate army rules in the game. And the reason that I say that is because with the World Eaters, you always have this temptation to go berserk and kill everything, right? You're like, oh my god, I got advance and charge this turn. I could send these guys out and kill that, these guys out, kill that, these guys go kill that. I could just kill everything, and it's turn one. I could use my scout moves. Like, I could just go mental and kill everything. But that's often not the best strategy. So as the World Eater's player, you kind of feel like a World Eater, where you've got the nails biting. You're like, I want to go in there and I want to kill everything. But you actually have to fight against that and try to, use your better judgment to make the right decisions. And I think it feels very accurate to the lore. Whereas I find you'll find Dark Eldar players, or Drakari players, where they're just flying around being annoying. They're like, cool, I'm just going to fly over onto this objective and sit here, and I'm going to fly into that objective, and these guys are going to stand here and create a screen, and none of that feels very real, you know what I mean? And none of that, you wouldn't imagine a bunch of Kabalite warriors going and standing in a single file line in front of their tanks to prevent somebody from punching their tank, so just those sorts of play styles, they don't feel super immersive, whereas I feel like the World Eater's army, the rules create an experience that I think is similar enough to what it would be like to be a World Eater, that it's a truly immersive and fantastic experience. What are your thoughts on that?
I play the army more patiently than anybody I've ever met or seen in my life. And I absolutely agree, because sometimes it's like, if you roll advance and charge, I have to catch myself. If you roll advance and charge and that you shouldn't have a go turn, not enough in range, you're like, I don't want to spend a CP on an auto 6 for this unit. So I'll just roll it and see what happens. You roll it and it's like a 5 or a 6. You're like, you kind of catch yourself, because you're like, but I could. But it's again, just being able to slow yourself down and be patient with it. The blessing of the army is it does play the rules, but it does play like they do in the books and everything. You feel the nail, you want to kill stuff. That's the fun part of the game. That's what everybody enjoys. But the fun thing is that's what everybody else thinks we want to do as well. Yeah. So especially in mid tables at tournaments, everybody's going to be expecting you to want to do that. So when you play the game patiently and you're just sending out a couple units on primary objectives and stuff like that, people are going to have to come and tango with you anyway. But if they're doing that in turns 3, 4, 5, and you're already really far ahead on primary, because they thought you're going to have a huge alpha strike, and then you're playing primary calmly like a good boy, not like Corn wants you to, then it's that's huge for us, because we have a reputation of being that army.
Yeah.
And on our data sheet, we are that army. So understanding that other people think that, and then being able to do something that's more competitive, but contrast that. I've never played an army where other people make more deployment errors in my life. People take themselves, especially Death Guard. The Death Guard matchup sucks for us because they're so tanky. But some Death Guard players will take themselves out of the game for 3 turns because they have such limited movement and they're scared of the alpha strike. They should still respect. You can only put -1 damage, the stratagem, on one thing. It's just I agree. I agree that it plays the way that you feel the nails biting, but most of the time, when you have a go turn, unless the game's going poorly and you need to pull something out of your butt, it'll be fairly evident that you should be having a go turn. And go turns are so fun with this army that I swear to God, 60% of the time I forget to draw my secondaries.
I agree. That's so funny. My mates are always mocking me for that.
I get halfway through my movement phase, and I'm so focused on just wanting to kill everything that it's oh, what am I supposed to be doing?
That is bang on.
Yeah.
And then, like you were saying, there's something really special about you deploy Lord of the Cardis and you're 8-bound all the way up on the front edge of your line, and then your opponent deploys really deep because they want to try to hide from you, and then you just use your scout move to move backwards and hide, and then your opponent's oh crap. Now, if I want to get to those 8-bound, it's going to take me 3 turns of movement just to be able to shoot them where they are. And your opponent's oh no, I've made a huge mistake because now I'm out of the game. But just like in the lore, almost every time you hear that the battle goes poorly for the World Eaters, it's because they gave into the nails and they went too early and they went full send. So it's just for me, it's such an immersive experience. Going, okay, I'm going to be the world leader's general here. I've got a bunch of maniacs on the table that I need to direct, and I'm going to tell them to hold. Just fucking hold. Stop being
Yeah,
maniacs. Just give
yeah,
them one turn. Let them do something for one
yeah,
turn, and then we'll come out.
yeah.
So with that in mind, what are your sort of predictions and wish list items for the upcoming World Eaters Codex?
So detachment wise, um, like for the Codex as well as like what I'm hoping for our detachment later this month.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
roll it all together.
So unfortunately for the detachment later this month, um, I'm not super optimistic because our index is already really good.
100%
And
agree.
unfortunately, it's not going to be like exactly it's like plus one attack and like strength and attack is like it's good. It's good and it swings the math on a lot of things. But that's not even the biggest thing. Is the biggest thing is like, do I want to take something that's going to make me give up being able to bleed on an objective,
Yeah.
which is literally the only way you can play into some armies. Do I want to give up an auto six advance, which gives you like which takes away like the randomness of the army that we're talking about that we don't really want. Do I want to give up being able to do my corn roll again and give myself another buff? Like just kind of like it's there's so much like good stuff in our index already. Of course, I'm excited for new flavor. Like anybody, but it would take a lot to swing me over to a new detachment.
Yeah, I agree.
For me to give up being able to bleed on an objective, I with like because movement wins games, I would need at least a 6 inch pile in and consolidate, and I would need some way for 8 bound or terminators to blood surge as well or reactive move.
Yeah, reactive moves.
Then I yeah
I could definitely see a
then I
detachment
would
that has
start
that.
considering it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if they had a detachment where, you know, maybe the detachment rule is you get a blood surge move, and if you already have a blood surge move, it's like D6 plus 3, you know? If they had a rule like that, then you'd be like, oh, that's pretty good. Like, that might be good enough to sacrifice these other things. But it realistically, that they're sticking the objectives, the auto sixing the advance, the ability to get that blessings roll. You know, it's essentially like 1 CP for army wide feel no pain or army wide sustain hits. It's like that's
yeah.
insane for 1 CP. You
Even
know,
the plus one to wound is like huge,
yeah,
like
exactly.
so big.
It's like all of these things. Not only are they huge, but they're arguably like mandatory. Like you just the faction just doesn't work without them. You know, it
Yeah,
doesn't work without the plus one to wound because there's so many things in the game that are just so tough. If you can't put that plus one to wound on, now all of a sudden you just can't kill things that you hit. Especially if you're also
yeah,
dropping the plus one strength and attack. Like if you drop plus one strength, plus one attack, and plus one wound, the damage just falls off a cliff. So
yeah.
in order
Yeah.
for the new detachment to be something that I would consider, it actually has to be insane, like OP. So I think something like an army wide blood surge would probably do it, or you know some serious like reactive moves, uppy downies, that sort of stuff. You know maybe
Yeah,
pluses to charge from deep strike or something like that, so that you can uppy downy and deep strike, or maybe a 6 inch deep
yeah,
strike and then charge like the demons have. There's a few
yeah,
things they could do, but I agree with you that it's a very tall order.
yeah. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm excited for it. Like, I'm always excited for new rules, but with the tools we have in our codex currently, like right now, our index is incredibly good.
Yeah,
As far as like codex predictions, for detachment, I would love to see like red butcher support for you that like buff terminators, which they should get like a plus one damage stratagem,
yeah,
which would be huge for terminators, which would be really nice. And maybe giving terminators like exclusively the ability to like blood surge in that detachment and stuff like that would be awesome just to open up play there because like I think I watched your video on them and like they have play into some matches. It's not the way that I play the army personally, but I'm not saying
yeah,
it's not competitive. Um, but it's just I want to see it like opened up a little more.
Yeah.
and have a reason to lean into those units we aren't using. So there'll probably be something to do with demon engines, like some kind of detachment there, like where they get, I don't know, I don't even know what you give them. They already have like bonuses to charge and stuff like that. It's just so hard to justify the slowing in movement that you get from not being able to go through terrain, that they would need to be able to go through terrain
Yeah.
for me to consider bringing any of them. Um, an 8-bound detachment would be nice, like something similar to like Disciples of the Red Angel. I would really like from the last edition. And if people didn't play last edition, it basically gave you like when 8-bound is shot at, they get like a full move, which is like back then that wasn't the competitive way to play them, because like the again like the regular like Codex was really good, but like having like the full like 9-inch move on the 8-pound every time you shoot at them would be actually ridiculous.
Yeah.
But just having some like support there, like even giving like regular 8-pound like access to like a feel no pain, or so, but like they're already so good, and they're already like the unit that everybody's bringing, and they're toughness 6, and they all have their own auras for some reason. Which whenever I complain about a unit, I read like the 8-bound and exalted 8-bound and Angron data sheet rules, and I'm like, I cannot complain about like
Yeah.
anything
What
except
about
for maybe the new Angron detachment. Yeah,
what
but
about new units? Is there any? Because I think in order for them to create a World Eaters Codex that's going to be exciting and interesting, they have to add new units because we already have amazing data sheets and we already have amazing detachment. So they're either going to do what they did to the Custodies to us, and they're going to rip the guts out of our faction and split all of our good stratagems across multiple detachments, and which I desperately hope they don't do that. Um,
hey, Custodians didn't do too bad at
but
Worlds.
yeah, they've brought it back with some points changes, and that's one of the beautiful things, right? Is that even if they do nerf the faction, it'll only be 3 months before they'll realize, oh, World Eaters are in the toilet now. Let's reduce their points costs and bring them back into the fold. So nothing's ever permanent, but I think if they want to create something exciting and interesting, what they need to do is introduce some new units and then create some detachments themed around those units. So, like, one of the things I'd like to see is like rampages or something like that, where it's like a berserker with a jump pack, right? And then also bring in the Dreadclaw, which is like the World Eaters drop pod, right? And then have a detachment that's like, descending blood or whatever you want to call it, where it's all themed around things that arrive from reserves going in and doing damage that way. And that way you could create an entirely new playstyle for the World Eaters that's completely separate to what we've been playing, that's interesting and fun. That's the sort of stuff I'd like to see.
Yeah, that would be cool. And to be honest, giving Berserkers the option to fly over things would actually be, especially in this meta, critically helpful.
Yeah.
So just having like the different tools. I've said this before, and you can quote me on this. If I don't do it, you can hold it against me. As soon as we get Juggernaut Cavalry or more good elite units with new rules, I'm dropping Angron from my list.
Yep.
It's not because I don't think he's cool, and he's by far the best painted thing in my army. So it'll make me sad. And it's the only model that my girlfriend knows the name of. But just having like more units and more tools, and like Angron's so frustrating because like whenever he comes back, it doesn't matter what the board state is. You only won the game because Angron came back, according to like everybody. And you're like, oh
Yeah,
my
correct.
god,
Yeah.
please, for the
Yeah.
love, yeah.
Dude,
So
I had a game the other day where Angron came back battle round 5, right? And did nothing, right? He literally didn't. He came back, failed his charge. That was it, right? But I still won the game. And my opponent's
do
like,
we have the
man,
same
he's like,
Angron?
Angron is so fucked. The way you can resurrect him. And I'm like, he did nothing. He did nothing. What are you talking about? But people just have it in their mind. Like, when they see that, they're like, dude, you were playing with an extra 415 points. And I was like, well, first of all, no, I wasn't, because he came back turn 5. So for the vast majority of the
Yeah.
game, I was down Angron. And when he came back, he did nothing. It doesn't matter.
Well, he's pointed to come back, right? So
Yeah,
it's like you're
correct.
giving up such a large. Well, he's not. One Angron is way too expensive, and two Angrons are too cheap.
Yeah.
So it's like you're basically paying for like 1.5 Angron. So it's like, why are you automatically putting that like randomness burden into your list? Where it's like, I know he fills a role right now that like the rest of your army doesn't by having fly, which again hopefully gets fixed and other things get fly, and then I cannot bring Angron. And he is like your big huge swings, which are
Yeah.
like cool. He's basically a large bloodthirster, but like 2 up, 4 up, with a 6 up feel no pain, like 100% of the time. He dies super quickly. So I'm just excited to be able to get like 3 min-sized units of like another elite infantry that can actually like do stuff in the game and give me more tools and more units to be able to like trade where I need to.
Yeah.
And then if I had to do it right now and take out Angron, I'm actually ready to start doing this. It's probably my next list, just because of the way the meta is shaping up. Um, my next list will have Angron. So, but I'm going to take out Master of Execution, but that's the point. Um, you have to bring like 2 big exalted breaks or like large breaks. It's just something with like lots of volume to be able to deal with like the big stuff, or else you don't want to look across the table as like what's supposed to be one of the most killy armies in the game and say, I can't kill that. Like
Yeah.
that would be such a feel bad moment. So we need some other way for that rule to get killed. So yeah, like Juggernaut Cavalry would be like awesome. Like give me something that's like T6, like I don't know, like 4 or 5 wounds, good movement, even if it's like mortals on the charge or something, like just another like movement tool,
Yeah.
would be awesome. Like a berserker surgeon, I would love. Give me like a cheap unit, like 50 or 60 points, maybe 70 points. You attach to a berserker squad, and it can go in the squad with another character because rhinos have 12 spots, and it gives the squad a 6 up feel no pain. So then that helps support your army rule, and then it can give them a 5 up feel no pain when you prop the feel no pain. It's just like having like new like little things like that would be nice and probably what we're gonna get. But of course, like fundamentally, what I want is a different way to play the game.
Yeah.
So I want new units like I've never bought a Demon Prince in my life, but like the Demon Prince, the like support like stuff that doesn't only even invol and like give your other units purpose in a different way. Like even like expensive characters like Demon Princes, give them like a like Wing Demon Prince, like give them like a cool rule with like some like flying units and stuff like just like a different way to play the game.
Yeah.
And that's what I hope is that not only did the detachment support different types of units, but if I had the same list, and let's say we get 3 or probably 4 detachments, I don't know. I'm going to get greedy and say 4 detachments.
Yeah.
Let's say we have 4 detachments. I would want at least 2 or 3 of those. If I had one list, I could still play that list and they could benefit from each detachment, but it's just a different way to play the game
Yes.
fundamentally,
Yeah.
just to
Yeah.
give like options. Because right now we have it's great. Like we have like a by and large, cover all your bases, can kind of do everything index, which is awesome. But like, I want the flavor, and we have such a fun army that like I've never got bored of it. But if we weren't basically like playing Warhammer on crack by having the movement and data sheets that we do, I would have been bored of this army so long ago
Yeah.
because of like the rules are just like the same stuff, and it's like it's not like a if we didn't have the data sheets we did, it wouldn't even be a fun way to play the game. It's just like a very like bog standard, like support everything kind of, but like I want like flavor, like even like the uppy downy like blood angels. Like I love that stuff.
Yeah.
Like
That's one of the
screw the
things
stuff
that
that
I'm
makes
sort
it
of
more
slightly
silly.
concerned about with the new book is that we're going to get cavalry mounted berserkers and we're going to get red butchers, right? But then you take that and you go, we've also got 8 bound and exalted 8 bound. Now you're talking about 4 different data sheets, all of which are effectively elite, tough, combat infantry. It's like they're all essentially the same thing. You know, there's some variations, of course, like the Exalted 8 bound have a better Feel No Pain save, the regular 8 bound have Scout Move, the Terminators have 2 up saves, the Cavalry are going to be mounted. So there'll be some, differences there, but I worry that they're going to be too similar to the point where one of them will just be superior and everyone will just take that one.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and like a good army list should give you the ability to play into lots of different things and give you lots of like tools, like
yeah,
having like the massive execution brick to deal with like Gatan and like so like there's a solution for everything. What I don't want is, as you said, for like dude, right now at Worlds I brought how many 8 bound did I brought 21 8 bound. why am I bringing essentially 7 units of like the same stuff
Yeah.
to like it's competitive. I'm beating people that win like 140 player tournaments, and it's like why is this a thing? And it would be nice to have like more diversity, just at least in the code where I want to bring new things that give me new tools. So it's like a I'll be yeah I don't know I just like the rules in our army are kind of bland, but our data sheets and the way they play are so fun that like you don't feel it.
Yeah.
But I am very excited for detachment, and I've got a couple new great list ideas, but I'm just waiting to see what the detachment brings before I settle on what I'm going to be going to next year with to try and win like my next big event and my next golden ticket.
Yep. Yep. Sounds good. All right. Well, speaking of which, what is your next event? And what are your sort of plans going forward? And is there anywhere where people can follow you to sort of keep up to date with your happenings?
So I there's a big event going on in Calgary this weekend. I'm not competing just because I only got back from England a couple days ago, and before that was World, so I'm just taking like a little bit of a 40K break.
Yep.
But my next event, I think I've got a big like. Usually, there's kind of like an event slump of large events in like the early like winter. So like January, February, usually not a lot going on, but like in March and April, it'll pick up. I got a 5-man team event that I think I'm probably going to go to in British Columbia. I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but that's in the middle of March. So I'll be going to that. Um, in April, at the beginning of April, will probably be one of my first big ticketed singles events. Called Fool's Errand for April Fools, and that takes place in Calgary,
Yep.
where I'm from. So if you want to play against me, somebody can fly to Calgary, or like if you live in Canada, drive to Calgary and like play in that. But the big one is the Alberta Classic, and that's in kind of like the middle of May. That's where I won my last event, like my last golden ticket, and that was that really large GT win. So I'll be absolutely be going to that one again. The West Coast Open is over in Vancouver, and that's a large like 200 person event. I'll probably be going to that one. But yeah, just filling out the season, and the biggest thing for me is like now that I know that team events award golden tickets, I'm going to try and get my golden ticket from a singles event again, and then just try and bring down as many of my teammates as I can to Atlanta because was actually like an incredible experience.
Hell yeah.
But if anybody's curious about that, on the Games Workshop Warhammer Twitch, I played a game against the only player there from Singapore. He was an undefeated Necrons player when I played him. And that's on the Games Workshop Twitch, the World Championship. It was the second game that's on there. So if you kind of want to see how I played with my army, absolutely check that out. Sometimes it's better to see the way that things play out. You can't hear me talking on it. It's the official Games Workshop like Twitch, but they have like commentators kind of going through everything. But apart from that, yeah. So just taking a little bit of a break now. I think I might be playing a stream game later this month that I'll absolutely post on like the World Leaders Facebooks and stuff like that. But apart from that, in general, I post some of my Warhammer stuff on like my personal Instagram, which is just like Frasier Perry, my name. But anything I'm doing with World Leaders, I just throw into like the World Leaders like Facebook group chat, just trying to keep everybody on the same page with everything. We have a great community, and every time I go anywhere or play a stream game, I've always got like people in the chat from like either like one of the Discords or like a Facebook group or people from like back home that are in like my own meta, like in the chat, like cheering me on. And like I want our faction to do really well, not too well, or else I get nerfed and things get harder for me. So only listen to half the video.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I'm really excited about the faction, and I think we have a great community, and I'm excited to see how it works out.
Hell yeah. Well, enjoy your break, mate. Sounds like you've put in the work and you definitely have earned, a little bit of time off from 40K before you come back swinging, in the early half of next year. And thanks again for your time, mate. This has been a great conversation. I hope people have picked up a thing or two there, or at the very least just found it entertaining. So, yeah, thanks again, man, and I'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks. Take care.
Cheers.
The warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable, and your fault.